Hello, Spartanburg. We're so excited that you're here today. We're going to call them forward. Are you ready? Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Louder. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Let me hear in Charlotte. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Louder. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Call them forward. Come on, call them. Let's go. And it is my pleasure to make a special introduction of a woman who is so well known across this country for her artistry as an actress, a humanitarian. Please join me in welcoming the one and only Cheryl Hines, also known as Bobby Kennedy's wife. Cheryl.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I just wanted to come out and connect with you for just a minute. Bobby and I have been making our way across South Carolina, and the people we've met have been extraordinary. And the state is absolutely beautiful. So thank you for having us. And one thing that we have been hearing from everybody is that the working class is being hammered. You know, Bobby and I have had a lot of time in the car from one county to another, so he has to listen to all my stories. He's a captive audience. But I tell him, you know, I grew up in a working class family where we were living paycheck to paycheck. And then most of my life, I've lived paycheck to paycheck. So I understand the stress of that and how, you know, it causes a lot of anxiety when you don't know if your electricity is going to be turned off, if you're going to have to make a decision to pay your rent or to buy more groceries. So I understand it. And Bobby and I have been, you're supposed to wait until I say, ladies and gentlemen. But Bobby and I have been doing a lot of talking about this, and I'm excited for you to hear what he has to say, because he is uniquely qualified to lead this country. Because what it's going to take to help the working class is for someone to stand up against the corporations that are corrupted. And I have watched Bobby through the years do exactly that. He stands up to big corporations. I was in the courtroom when he and his law firm sued Monsanto. And they were suing on behalf of one man, a groundskeeper at a school, who was wearing a tank of Roundup on his back to do his job. He contacted Monsanto and said, I have lesions on my back. Could it be because of Roundup? They did not answer him. They ignored him for years. And then Bobby and his law firm came in, proved that they ignored him because they were making too much money. So they did not even want to acknowledge that this man now has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because of their product. So Bobby stood up to a giant corporation. The only way they hear things is because somebody sues them and they have to pay a lot of money. That's the only time that they'll hear it. So Bobby is the man to do that. So I am looking forward to you guys hearing what he has to say. Once again, thank you for being here. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, you're supposed to be behind the curtain. Please welcome Robert Kennedy Jr.
Thank you, Cheryl Hines. happy to be here. And thanks to Dr. Kate and her family for hosting this amazing event. Thank you all for coming out and with such an extraordinary crowd today. Thank you. And we're finding big crowds like this all over the state. I was in Manchester, New Hampshire a week ago, and we opened up a headquarters there, and we were expecting a smaller crowd, but a huge crowd, like almost this size, showed up. And afterwards, I took selfies with everybody. Can everybody hear me in the back there? Okay. Can you hear me now? All right. If I drop this too low, raise your hand and remind me. But the last kid, I did selfies with everybody in the crowd, and the last kid who was in the line was a 22-year-old boy who said that he had never participated in politics, never voted before, but that he wanted to work on my campaign because he wanted to have hope for his own life, and he wanted to have pride in his country. And that same week, early that week, there was a poll that came out that showed that in 1985, 85% of Americans between 18 and 35 years old said they were proud of our country. The same poll taken last week showed that only 42% of young people say that they're proud of America. And that to me was one of the most heartbreaking data points in all of the data that I've been, reading since I came on this campaign, because I grew up at a period in history when I had the privilege to grow up with intense pride in the United States of America, and with a lot of good evidence that was evidence based. So this kid is worried because he is living paycheck to paycheck. As Cheryl said, he wants to buy a home. He thought part of the promise of the American dream was that if you work hard, you play by the rules, you can afford to pay a mortgage, you can take a summer vacation, you can raise a family and put something aside for retirement with one job. And he doesn't see any hope of that. And in the last 2 years, the price of housing in this country has gone up from $215,000 2 years ago to $400,000 today. And the interest rates have gone from 1% to 7%. Even 2 years ago, he was going to have trouble because he's paying off his college debt. Cheryl was 35 when she paid off her debt because she got a break from Curb Your Enthusiasm. But otherwise, she was working paycheck to paycheck and didn't see the light at the end of that tunnel. Well, this kid is paying 7 times for college what I paid, and has no hope of getting a home. Now, why the price of homes gone up? 2 reasons. One is because the cost of paying for the wars, $8 trillion in the last 20 years that have been paid for through a hidden tax called inflation. They're driving up the price of energy, the price of food, and the price of shelter, of homes. But even more so, there are 3 giant corporations, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Those corporations BlackRock alone is at $10 trillion under management. Those 3 companies own each other. So it's really just one giant company. They own collectively 88% of the S&P 500. And they've now decided they want to own all the single-family homes in America. So they are deploying their money to buy up these homes. And all of you know, how many people of you know have children who are in their 20s who are still living with their parents? And how many of you have heard recently of somebody who was about to buy a house, was ready to pay to finance that house, And at the last minute, somebody comes in, swoops in with a cash offer and takes that home away from them. It happens now every day. And the reason for that is the person or the entity is usually an LLC, so you don't know who they are. But behind almost all of them are three companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And if they stay on track to do what they intend to do, by 2030, so only 7 years from now, 60% of the single-family homes in this country are going to be owned by those three companies, like corporations. And this kid cannot compete against that. Oh, and because they're buying the housing stock, that puts pressure on the rental market, and the rents are now becoming unaffordable for kids. So we are the first generation in American history who believe that our children are going to be worse off than we are. And there's good reason for that. Now, today, 57% of Americans cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency in their family. You know, Cheryl was talking about making a decision about whether to pay for gasoline or to pay for food. And the terror that happens when the gas light comes on in your car, because you don't have the money to pay for that. And so many Americans are living like that today, and they're having to choose between food and medicine. They're having to choose between food and gasoline. They're having to, young couples who we've talked to, who sit in their rental property and listen to a little baby, their child, crying in the room next door, and are wondering whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $1,500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. Today, the average income in this country is now $5,000 less than the basic cost of living. So the cost of food, shelter, and transportation. So Americans are making that money up, that $5,000 deficit that half of Americans are experiencing, more than half are experiencing, by putting it on their credit cards. And as a result of that, last week we passed a milestone, $1 trillion of credit card debt by Americans, the highest level in history. And the companies that own that debt are charging American consumers 22% interest. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking, and they'd go to prison. But if the banks and the credit card companies do it, it's just the cost of doing business. And who do you think owns those banks and credit card companies? Virtually all of them. BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Oh, BlackRock, the CEO of BlackRock is a guy called Larry Fink. He also sits on the board of the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum is it's a conglomeration of billionaires that meets every year in Davos. And they have a plan for a new world order, which they call, not me, but they call the Great Reset. And Klaus Schwab, who runs the World Economic Forum, says that under the Great Reset, the vast mass of humanity will own nothing, but they will be happy. So they are definitely on their way to accomplishing the first part of that goal, which is that we will own nothing, they will own everything. And, I was lucky to grow up in a time that was the inverse of what's happening today. It was a time, the 50 years after World War II, that sociologists and economists call the Great Prosperity. It was a 50-year period when the American middle class emerged as the greatest economic engine in the history of human beings. We owned at that time, when I was a boy, when my uncle was president, our country owned half of the wealth on the face of the earth. We were making products that everybody in the world wanted. When I traveled with my father, mother abroad to Europe, Latin America, people would come up and offer me money for blue jeans or for transistor radios or RCA Victrolas. Everybody wanted American cars. Our cars were the gold standard automobiles in the world. The products that we made were desired everywhere. But not only that, people wanted our leadership. They believed in the moral authority of our country. I remember, and they knew the difference between bullying and leadership, but they wanted our leadership. I went to Poland in 1964 with my father and mother and three of my 11 siblings. And Poland at that time was a communist country, and they did not want us visiting. They did not invite us. My father had a local invitation from a local human rights group, and he went to see them. But the Polish government discouraged us from coming, and they blacked out in the newspapers, which were state-controlled, all mention of us being there. They did not want the people of Poland to know we were in the country. In fact, before we went, we all went out as a family, went out shopping to get presents for children in a very famous orphanage in Warsaw. And so we spent the day buying presents for the kids, and we were looking forward to distributing them. We took those presents over to the Warsaw orphanage, and the government had removed all the children from the orphanage because they didn't want us to have any contact with the Polish people. 2 days later, we went to Krakow to visit the Cardinal. The Cardinal of Krakow was a living saint. Everybody knew that he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church after he died, and in fact he was. He had been tortured by the communists, he'd been imprisoned by them. He had conducted himself with a level of dignity and piety that had inspired a religious resurgence all over Poland for the Catholic Church. And he was beloved by the Polish people. And we went to visit him. My parents were very, very excited about meeting a saint. And we waited for about 2 hours. I'll tell you just a little digression that when we were waiting in the rectory, a young priest came in and asked us to come in the kitchen. He offered to make us sandwiches. He made us chicken sandwiches. And he spoke good English, and he talked to us a lot about skiing. He wanted to know about all the ski areas in the United States. And then 40 years later, that priest became Pope John Paul II. And but we then visited with the Cardinal for a couple of hours. And when we had gone into the cathedral, the square, Krakow Square, which is a huge, huge plaza, was empty. But when we came out, there were 1 million people waiting for us. And there had been no notice in the papers. The word of our presence had spread by word of mouth. And they surrounded our automobile. My father brought all of us up on the roof of the embassy car. And he gave a speech, and then the people around us, surrounded us, they lifted the car, they shook it. They sang to us again and again this song called Sto Lat, which means may you live forever. And they sang the Polish national anthem again and again and again, which was illegal. It was a criminal act to sing it at that time. And they sang it again and again and again in an act of defiance, but love for the United States of America. There was an electricity in that crowd. There were tears coming down people's faces because they loved our country. And when we went to Italy, to France, to Germany, to Greece, to England, we got the same thing. People loved our country, and part of the reason for that is that my uncle had made a decision to project economic power abroad rather than military power. He had made a vow to keep our country out of wars. He was asked by his best friend, one of his two best friends. He was asked by one of his two best friends, Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Washington Post, what do you want on your gravestone as your epithet? And my uncle told him he kept the peace. That's what he wanted. He said to Bradley, the primary job of a president of the United States is to keep our country out of war. And during his administration, and 3 days before he took office, President Eisenhower, and I was at his inauguration. I was at the convention in 1960. I was a little boy, 6 years old. It was the first time I stayed up all night. 3 days before he took office, President Eisenhower, the outgoing president, gave what was probably, in retrospect, the most important speech in American history, where he warned Americans against the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would destroy our democracy and that would obliterate the middle class, that would turn America into a imperial state abroad and a national security state, a surveillance state, a garrison state at home, a totalitarian state at home. And my uncle, when he came into office, 3 months after he came in, he encountered that behemoth in the Bay of Pigs invasion when he realized the CIA, the intelligence apparatus, and the military brass had lied to him to try to get him into a war. And he came out, he took public blame for the Bay of Pigs, but privately, he told his aides, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And he spent the next 1,000 days of his presidency in a pitched battle with the military with the intelligence apparatus, the military brass, trying to keep our country out of war. He kept us out of Laos. They considered him a traitor for that. He settled that war without any deaths or any bloodshed. He kept us out of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. He kept us from invading Cuba again in 1962 during the missile crisis. He kept us out of Berlin during the Checkpoint Charlie crisis in '61. And he kept us out of Vietnam. All of his military brass, and including people that he loved and respected, people like Bob McNamara, like Averell Harriman, like General Maxwell Taylor, people he trusted, were telling him, you have to send 250,000 troops, American troops, into Vietnam, or the government there is going to collapse. And he said, it's not our fight. They have to fight their own battles. It's not an American war. He ended up sending 16,000 military advisors. They were technically not allowed to participate in combat, although some of them did anyway. But it's fewer people, fewer men that he sent to Oxford, Mississippi to get one black man into Ole Miss, James Meredith. And then in October 22nd of 1963, he heard that a Green Beret had died in Vietnam. And he asked Walt Rostow, one of his aides, for a full casualty list. Walt Rostow brought him a casualty list that showed that 75 Americans had died there. And he said, that's too many. We're bringing them all home. That afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all Americans out of Vietnam by the end of 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December of '63, a month later. Exactly 30 days to the day of him signing that order, he was murdered. And a week after that, LBJ signed a remand of National Security Order 263. A year later, LBJ sent 250,000 troops to Vietnam. And, and 3 years after that, Martin Luther King, who had become a peace activist, he had broken with some of the other civil rights leaders. He said, we cannot have civil rights at home. We cannot end poverty at home if we're an imperial nation abroad. And he said, it is destroying the working people and the middle class of this country, funding that war. It is robbing the war on poverty. And we cannot solve the problems of violence at home if we're committing the violence abroad. And he then was killed in April of 1968. My father, campaigning against the same war, ran for president against a president of his own party, against that war specifically, was killed 2 months later in June of 1968. Nixon got elected, sent 560,000 troops over there. 56,000 never came back, including my cousin, George Skakel, who died in the Tet Offensive. And since then, we've had a series of traumas in our country, beginning with my uncle's death, Martin Luther King's death, my father's death, the Vietnam War, 9/11, and finally the COVID crisis, which has brought us down that road to what Eisenhower warned us against the emergence of the domination of our democracy by a military-industrial complex. And now we're in another war, and which my son has fought in on the side of the Ukraine as a machine gunner in a special forces unit. He joined the Foreign Legion over there. But it's a war that we should not have had. It should never have happened. That could have easily been settled. And we've sent $113 billion over there, and President Biden this week is asking for $22 billion more from the Senate. And he's attached that to a bill to give Hawaii Maui relief. So he's holding that hostage. He's holding Maui hostage, the Senate, to pass this bill. And I'm going to go back to March of this year when we topped that off at $113 billion. The entire budget of EPA is $12 billion a year. The entire budget of CDC is $12 billion a year. We're sending $113 billion over there. We have people in this country, a third of the people in this country, who are not making enough money to pay for basic human needs for food, shelter, and gasoline. I have a friend, I've represented commercial fishermen my entire career. I started on the Hudson, representing commercial fishermen against polluters, and done that all over, including in North Carolina and all over the country. And one of my best friends, a commercial fisherman from the Cape, he fishes out of, spent his lifetime, he's my age, fishing out of Wellfleet, at Provincetown, and Chatham. It's a tough job, and he has a lot of injuries. He's now on full disability. His son-in-law runs the company, but he doesn't have a pension, and he doesn't have any savings. He relies on food stamps. He got $283 a month for his food stamps. And that money, which was barely enough for him to eat decently, was steadily decreasing because paying for all of these wars, paying the $8 trillion for the wars since 2001, $16 trillion that COVID cost us, and another $8 trillion in the last 2 years of stock buybacks, which end up billing us all and benefiting Wall Street. And all of these shift wealth upward and rob it from the middle class. Because to pay for those expenses, we pay for it through this secret tax called inflation. The price of food, according to the government, has gone up by 38% in 2 years. But the real price of food, of basic necessities like chicken, eggs, and dairy, have gone up 76%. His food stamps are 76% less than they were 3 years ago. But on March 1st, he got a robocall from the government telling him his food stamps were being cut to $23 a month. He was already changing ingredients to buy cheaper ingredients so he could get through the checkout line. He called me 2 weeks ago and he said, I'm down to one meal a day. Well, guess what? 30 million Americans got that call in March. 15 million Americans got a call that they were being cut from Medicare. And if we kept all of those people on Medicare and food stamps, you know what it would have cost? $113 billion. So we made a decision, and that same month, the Fed printed $300 billion unanticipated to pay off the Silicon Valley Bank. So when the bankers need it, when the billionaires need it, when the military-industrial complex need it, we have plenty. Or when regular Americans need to feed themselves and their families, we don't have the money. And Mitch McConnell was on TV explaining that about the $113 billion because Republicans are supposed to be concerned about budget deficits. And he said, don't worry, that money is not really going to Ukraine. It's really going to U.S. military contractors. So it's a good thing for our country. It's going to Raytheon, it's going to General Dynamics, it's going to Boeing, and it's going to Lockheed. Well, who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And so it's not really going to the American people. It's going to billionaires, and it's another way of strip mining the wealth away from the American people. Now, I'm just going to tell you one other thing. I was in Iowa this week, and they're building one of the big issues in Iowa is they're building a pipeline there. It's a carbon pipeline. It's not for oil or gas, but it's for carbon sequestration. I've been working on the environment 40 years and I've been on the board of the biggest green tech venture capital firm in the country. From day one, I've been against carbon capture because it is a scam. It's a boondoggle. All of these projects are bad. They're all designed to monetize the climate crisis and turn it into money for rich people and do nothing for the environment. So this is going to capture the carbon from this very pure form of carbon from the ethanol plant. There are 3,300 miles worth of pipelines. A big one ends in the Bakken crude field. The other two end in the southern Illinois oil fields. What they say they're doing is they're going to drill deep well injection and store that carbon under the ground forever. But it never works. I've been involved in these kind of projects. They always leak. But we also know something. North Dakota has told the pipeline, we're not going to give you a permit to do that. But they're going forward with it anyway. Why? Because their intention was never to bury it. Their intention is to use it. This is how 95% of carbon capture is used to date, to inject into exhausted oil wells to extend their life. So it's doing the opposite of carbon capture. It's actually going to be releasing more carbon to the environment. 80% of the people in Iowa are against it. Why? Because they're condemning 3,000 miles of the best farmland in the world through eminent domain. They're taking it by force away from those farmers at a time when we need that productivity, and they're handing it over to these pipeline companies. 80% of the people are against it. 46 counties have objected to the Senate. The reason I'm telling you this is a parable. It's not your issue. It's an Iowa issue. But the only people for it in the state are a tiny handful, the governor, and a tiny handful of legislatures who've accepted $1.6 million from the people who are pushing the pipeline. Everybody else in the state's against it. And who do you think owns that pipeline? BlackRock. So, and the benefits to BlackRock they get a per gallon fee that is a tax credit. The total value, which means it's just money that we are paying them to do this. The total value of that tax credit over 10 years, the life of this project, is $173 billion. It's more than the Ukraine war. And so this company, this is how they're just strip mining the wealth through this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. They are strip mining the wealth from the American people, from our middle class. They're taking our equity. They're destroying our democracy. They're corrupting public officials. And there's no end to where they will go with this. And we have to stop them. And that's why I'm running for president, because I'm going to stop them. I've been suing these companies, as Cheryl said, for 40 years. I've sued almost every agency. I've sued NIH, CDC, FDA, the USDA. I'm in litigation right now with USDOT because I'm representing 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. EPA, all of these agencies, I've litigated against them. I know how to unravel the corporate capture. In many cases, I know the individuals in those agencies who need to be moved out. You know, when we were doing the Monsanto case, we came across discovery documents that showed that the head of the pesticide division at EPA for a decade was a guy called Jess Rowland, and he was secretly working for he was being paid by us, the taxpayer, but he was secretly working for Monsanto the entire time. And he was killing studies that would have shown much earlier that Roundup was causing these cancers in people. And in fact, one of the emails from him, the people, the executives at Monsanto are saying, we're really worried that the Agency for Toxic Substance Control, that they are doing a study on their own that is about cancer and Roundup, and we got to kill that study. Jess Rowland had nothing to do with that agency. He was at EPA. But he said to them, I'm going to kill that study for you, but you got to give me a gold medal. And this is what happens in these agencies. The people at the high levels of the agency are people who will carry water for the industry they're supposed to regulate. And what they do, if you watch them, is throughout their career, they climb up by doing favors for the big shots that they're supposed to be protecting us against. And then when they get to be the branch heads, the division heads, and when their pensions vest, so they're getting 100% of their income back from the government, they then retire with 100% pensions, and they go to work for the industry they're regulating. So the last 2 or 3 years that they're there, they're doing as many favors as they can for those industries. And that's how this cycle of corruption, one of the ways, one of the vectors through which this cycle of corruption works. I know how it works. I know the perverse incentives that encourage it. And I know how to stop it, and I will do it when I get in there. I want to tell you one last thing that I'm going to do, which is I'm going to immediately change the tax code so that to make it unprofitable or very, very difficult for large corporations to buy single-family homes. And so that they cannot compete with our children. So BlackRock can no longer compete with our children in buying homes. And our kids can get back in homes, which is the promise of the American dream. I'm also going to immediately create a 3% mortgage instrument for Americans. And you know, if you have a rich uncle, you don't have problems who's willing to co-sign a mortgage for you. You don't have a problem getting a mortgage for a cheap price because the mortgage company is looking at his credit rating. And they're going to base the price of your mortgage on his credit rating. And so they're going to give you a much better value on that mortgage. Well, I'm going to give every American a rich uncle, and his name's Uncle Sam. And I'm going to put a guarantee on mortgages of a new class of mortgages, 3% mortgages. And I'm going to, and without raising a dime from raising any more of the federal deficit, which I'm going to be working on lowering. And the way I'm going to do that is by financing those mortgages with bonds that are 3% bonds that are tax-free. Oh, I'm going to be able to sell those. And the first $500,000 of those mortgages we're going to give just to teachers because we need to start supporting education in this country, and we need to make these homes available to teachers so that they can live in the cities where they teach. And I've got a lot of other plans. I'm very, very excited. If I do get in there, this country is going to change, and it's going to change radically. And I'm going to give you all back the promise of America so that you can give it to your children, so that they can be proud of this country today as we were, as I was, and as all of you or my age was growing up. So thank you all very much, and thank you for coming out today and for your support.
The next President of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. I say South Carolina, you say Kennedy. South Carolina. South Carolina. South Carolina. Very good. Now, we're going to go to a period where for 20 minutes you get to ask questions. I'm here with a lavalier mic. Mr. Kennedy's going to hold this one. Mr. Kennedy, I'm going to see if this mic is operative. Hold on. Testing, testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, Bobby, you just stay close and operate the sound there. Okay, a question. Yes, sir. Let me get behind that camera. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Close. Hold it close.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kennedy. I was actually in Greenville yesterday, so you making some. So my question is, America used to be the beacon of democracy, and recently in March, USA had held a democracy summit, which was hosted by USA itself, Costa Rica, Netherlands, and Zambia. So my question is, America is exporting democracy out there, but we still get to have coup and military takeovers in Africa, even when taxpayers here through USAID and State Department are paying for that. What are you going to do differently to make sure that the democracy that America is exporting out there benefits the people in Africa and other developing countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very, very good question. My uncle created USAID. My uncle, John Kennedy, created USAID in 1961 because he was trying to change U.S. foreign policy. U.S. foreign policy up to that point had been about supporting, giving weapons and money to juntas and to local oligarchs who said they were anti-communist. So as long as they said we don't like communism, and they would usually point to poor people, any poor person who wanted a fair deal, they would say they were a communist. And that was U.S. foreign policy through Eisenhower. My uncle wanted to do something different by not giving money to corrupt governments, but going directly to the poor and trying to build middle classes in Africa and in Latin America. And he created USAID for that purpose and the Alliance for Progress. My uncle said he didn't want an African child, to, when they hear the word the United States of America, to think of a man in a military uniform. He said he wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer, food from USAID, food from Alliance for Progress, Kennedy Milk. As a result of that, there are more statues to John Kennedy in Africa and Latin America and Asia, more universities named after him, more boulevards, more avenues than any other American president. Now, as soon as my uncle died, the CIA took over USAID, and the business community took over the Alliance for Progress. My father, actually, his first break with Lyndon Johnson was over a fight because the Alliance for Progress had been taken over by U.S. corporate interests, and my father was angry at that. But today, USAID is just a front for the CIA. What it does is regime change, and in fact, in Ukraine, in 2014, USAID pumped $5 billion into creating the Maidan Rebellion, which ended up in a coup d'etat, violent coup d'etat, against the elected government of the Ukraine, and we put in a pro-Western government. We actually named the cabinet officials a month before the overthrow, the neocons on the right, Victoria Nuland, in a tape-recorded conversation with the U.S. ambassador to Kiev, named the new government before there was even a revolution. We spent $5 billion funding that revolution over there, and that's really what started the Ukraine war. The Russians then had to go into Crimea to protect their port, which they've had for 347 years, so that the U.S. Navy wouldn't go into that port and take it from them, at the invitation of government that we had put in power. And that was what people are not told about what's happening in Ukraine. This has happened all over the world. Between 1947 and 1997, USAID and the CIA were involved in 87 coups, a third of the countries in the world, and most of them were democracies. I disagree with you on one thing. We say we are exporting democracy, but we're really, the function of the CIA is to dismantle democracy. It's to do coups d'etats against democracy. And, anyway, I'm going to change that. I'm going to change it. We spent, that they have now a $10 billion budget at USAID, and they're spending it destroying democracy all over the world, and that's not a good thing for America. Everybody knows it except for Americans.
Testing. Next question.
Hello, sir. At the end of the lockdown, I encountered you on the Encino Hill Trail with your beautiful dogs with a couple of friends, and I didn't recognize you. And had I would have asked you this. And by the way, what beautiful dogs. Oh, my God.
I like hearing that.
Yeah, from the outside, the average person, we do not understand how the COVID debacle and takeover and, toward the reset, how that came to be. And I would like to know if you understand the complexity of all the underground stuff that was going on and how it funneled out so that this horrible thing happened to this country, and if you have a plan to stop that from happening again.
So, I've written a bunch of books on this now. I have a new book coming out about Wuhan that's about the history of this very troubling link between the U.S. military, the United States intelligence agencies, and the public health agencies. And the big issue during COVID is that the public health agencies stopped doing public health. And instead they did this instead of a public health response to a public health crisis, we had a militarized and monetized response to that crisis. And when the VRBPAC, which is the FDA committee that approves new medical products, when they asked Operation Warp Speed for their leadership chart, Operation Warp Speed, the first time declassified that chart. And you can all see it on the internet today. And you can see it on CHD's website. But the chart did not have, the lead agency was not NIH. The lead agency was the National Security Agency. The second agency was the Pentagon. So why are spies and soldiers involved with a public health response from the beginning, from day one? And that is something that has to be decoupled. We need public health agencies to be doing public health and not being the spear tip of a biosecurity agenda that is an agenda that's dictated by the Pentagon and by the intelligence apparatus. Why is it that Avril Haines, who is the deputy director of the CIA, was the host of Event 201 in 2019, which was the simulated coronavirus pandemic that happened 3 months before the coronavirus pandemic happened. And she hosted it in New York City. And why is she there? Why are we not addressing public health with a public health response? And what would a public health response look like? We have the internet now. We can link to all 15 million frontline doctors all around the world who are practicing medicine, who are treating COVID. finding out what works for them, what treatments that they're finding out, and distilling those and processing them, verifying them, and then getting that information to frontline doctors in the United States. The opposite of that happened. Any doctor who departed from the orthodoxy was punished and silenced. What you want is transparency during a pandemic. You want absolute transparency, and you want lots of knowledge and information coming in from diverse sources, and exactly the opposite. We had extreme secrecy. We had punishment of people who were promoting therapeutic methodologies that departed from the single government orthodoxy. And everything became, about how do we make everybody take this, this one intervention. So I've written a detailed historical account going back to 1947 of how those agencies became intertwined. I think it's going to take a lot of effort to decouple them, but I know that I can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next question. Do you want to ask a question?
Thank you for the question. It's hot, it's humid. You've been here for more than an hour. I don't think our current president would have done that. So thank you very much.
Question.
I'm not sure.
Question.
In the 1860s, Abraham Lincoln very famously chose a Democrat to be his running mate. And last week or a couple weeks ago, you said you would not consider running with President Trump, but I urge you to reconsider that because I wasn't satisfied with that answer. But what about other Republicans like Vivek Ramaswamy or someone? Because I'm here, I'm a registered Republican. I don't know the political makeup of this crowd, but I heard your message. I've been listening, so have all of us. So.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, and I think, your point is a really good one, that Lincoln, in his cabinet, Doris Kearns wrote this book about Doris Kearns wrote a book about Lincoln and about how he included his rivals in his cabinet. And that's what I will do as president. I'm not going to tell you right now, about a plan B, because I only have one plan, and that's winning the White House, and that's plan A. But I do say that I don't think my wife would stay married to me if I joined the Trump administration. But you can talk to her afterwards.
You have my support. I want you to be the nominee. But how are they? They're stopping. They're blocking you. They won't let you have a debate. They won't let you do anything.
That's it. Thanks.
Those are all good questions, and I believe that we can, as wounded as our democracy is, I believe that we can make it work, and I believe that everybody here somehow believes that, or they wouldn't be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next question.
Will you come over here afterwards? Because there's a gentleman over here who really needs a question answered. After this one.
Quick question, to kind of follow up him. The DNC has said that they're not going to have Biden debate you, which, as most people know, the national debate kind of puts a lot of decisions in people's minds. How are you going to force the DNC, or if it's even possible to force them into a debate with your primary candidate, which I assume is going to be Biden, but who knows in the end?
I think we're just going to keep putting that pressure on. We all have to do that. I mean, in this state, too, is being taken for granted. President Biden thinks that, he put South Carolina first because he believes that he can control the vote here, and that he can't do that in New Hampshire. He can't do that in New Hampshire. He can't do it in Iowa, but he can control the vote here. And what we're going to do is we're going to fight county by county. We have 6 headquarters opening in this state. We're going to fight county by county, person by person, and we're going to keep asking President Biden to come out and do the same thing. We live in a democracy today that so many Americans believe is rigged against them, that the economic system is rigged and that the political system is rigged. And we really both parties need to make this campaign templates for democracy, to show our commitment to democracy, that, it's not after the Citizens United case came out, the tsunami of money made it so politicians really don't have to meet people anymore. They just have to shake hands with a few billionaires. The DNC already has $2 billion. I think they feel that they got enough money to buy the election and that the president can stay in the basement and not campaign. And we're going to try to make him come out and campaign and meet Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
And by the way, the Soviet Union had a system where the party would pick the candidates and elections were fixed. And, we should show that we can do better than that system, that the DNC and the RNC should not be telling the American people these are the only two guys you can vote for. We ought to have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. And by the way, apropos of what he just said, when you leave, you'll see envelopes in which you can make a contribution to Kennedy 24. So we ask each one of you to help us out, make a contribution. If you don't use the envelope, go to Kennedy24.com. You can make a contribution there, or you can sign up and help us go door to door. In any event, you'll help us carry South Carolina. How's that sound? Yeah. Okay. So,
and any of you who have who feel like you got a nice group of friends or followers, we're signing up delegates now for Kennedy delegates so that you can come to Chicago and have a great time at the convention. So talk to our team if you feel like you might want to come to Chicago in August.
thank you, Mr. Kennedy. And remember, there's signs on the way out. You can pick up a Kennedy sign. Yes, sir.
Yes, welcome to Spartanburg. Glad to have you here. We've seen what's happened with the previous Republican administration, kind of bucking the system. They had their party against them, the press against them. And you seem to be having the same problem. And in your case, it seems like your extended family is even against you. How will you surround yourself in your administration for people that don't undermine you and backstab you and do what you want, that you think needs to be done, your vision for America?
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm going to have any problem with that. I feel like I'm going to not pick people based upon partisan loyalty, that I'm going to have a big, a large group of people who are very, very talented, who will execute my policies and who are committed to them, not because out of tribalism or any kind of, personal gain, but because they have a passion for our country. And my uncle was able to do that. I don't feel like I'll have any problem doing it. By the way, I have a big family. I think in July there were 107 Kennedys in Hyannisport. And so, yeah, I do have a few of them against me, but I got a lot of them for me, too. So I think all of us have.
Let's hear it for the Kennedy family. Okay, next question.
Hi, Lori Timmerman, and many of us think that the last elections were highly rigged. I wanted to bring the Kennedy campaign the awareness of a group called Represent Us and the Unrigged Summit that could mine a lot of solutions. It's bipartisan. So, yeah, the question is how in this coming up election to build on all of the research of election fraud and counter that and not have it happen in this next go-round.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't have any power to do anything about this election. I think we need to, our country is the greatest democracy in the world. I've written articles about election fraud in 2004 and in 2001. I don't think people should be vilified for questioning the elections. I think what we need to do is we need to figure out election system. Instead of looking in the past, we need to look to the future and say, how do we make sure that we have elections that every American believes in? I like what your group is doing. I think ultimately, my own belief is that we need paper ballots in every jurisdiction.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. By the way, we have time for 2 more questions, and then after that, we're going to take a group picture. And the people who are sitting over to my immediate right, I would ask you, during that period, start making your way around here so you can get in the picture if you can, if you'd like to. And we're going to go to the next question. Yes, please.
Thank you, Bobby. Maureen McDonald. I had the honor of being on that health forum panel with you. And my question is, there's a lot of predictions, who knows what's real, who knows what isn't, that mid-September they're going to try to pull out the fear porn card again and bring about lockdowns and masking and all the things that didn't work last time. What can we all do? I know you advocate nonviolent noncompliance. So we're all asking you, I'm asking you what you would do as president. I think it's really up to us this time, too, to join in this nonviolent noncompliance and not buy into the BS that the narrative is trying to drive.
I would agree with that.
Okay, this is the final question right here. Yes, sir.
I enjoyed your speech. I just had a question that related to what you were saying about young people not really being prideful in their country. My parents were both born in the USSR, and you say what you want about it. Over there, the youth, I feel like the youth over there had more of a hope and pride for their country. Like, young people were hopeful for the future and prideful for their country. And a problem right now and for the youth is that they feel like they have no place in society, and there's kind of no hope for them for the future. So my question is, what will be if you become president, what will be your plans to have young people more involved in politics and just society in general?
I mean, that's a really good question. There's so much about our communities, the feeling of community, that it has deteriorated, and that is disintegrating now. People feel atomized by social media, by large governments that seem completely out of touch with people, by the loss of local sovereignty, by the loss of any sense of community. And it's that feeling of dispossession, of alienation, that is leading to this mass epidemic of depression, of drug addiction, of alcoholism, of suicide now that is debilitating, particularly our young people. And I have many proposals, and you can go to our website. But my administration is going to be about rebuilding the sense of community in this country, and building the connections, rebuilding connections between human beings, and making everybody American feel relevant and feel like they're part of the system. And you start doing that by telling the truth to people ruthlessly, and by making sure that democracy works, that everybody in this country believes that the elections, are real, and that their participation counts, and devolving power as much as possible away from the federal government towards communities, to let people experiment with different forms of government, and feel that they really have sovereignty over their own lives. And that is what my mission is going to be as president. So thank you for asking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. We're done with questions. Do you want to move
From here, these people feel neglected.
Okay.
These people feel neglected and alienated over here.
Thank you.
We're going to start here.
Hey, sir. I'm Beth Moranville. I moved here from Southern California and fought right alongside you. Didn't wear a mask, won't wear a mask. Went to a church where nothing was closed, and we're not playing. And I have been deployed here, is what God told me, to help Southerners learn to stand. And I'm very disgusted to see that Morris Brown University has started masking today, that there are other places. And so, similar to what she asked, I would like for you to tell South Carolinians, as we work in the Southern California and California area and know not to play, what would you say of what is it that we need to be doing right now if they start that crap on us?
I think the more people who get involved in communicating with people who are in decision makers, the more likely it is that our rights will be respected, and we will get a genuine public health response to public health issues, and not get a militarized or a totalitarian reaction to it. So I think all of us need to listen. There was a generation of Americans that fought to give us our democracy, our Bill of Rights, our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom of our jury trials, all these things that we saw taken away from us during that the pandemic. And I think we have to make sure that never happens again. They now have a template that says, yeah, it's okay. I mean, there is no pandemic exception in the United States Constitution. And we need to make sure that our constitutional rights are protected under any circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Kennedy. I'm just going to be short and simple. Would you support abolishing the federal income tax and returning back to a gold standard for the United States?
I do not think that's possible at this moment in history. I think what we need to do is we need to unwind the power of the Fed, which has devolved into really just an instrument of the central banks. It is captured by the central banks. And we need to start unraveling. My uncle tried to go down that road by issuing silver certificates and gold certificates. And so to anchor at least some of our currency in a base currency. And I want to do that too. And I've talked about that openly. But I think the main thing to do immediately is to reclaim transparency and sovereignty over the Fed, which we do not have anymore, and to make sure at all costs that it does not extend that power to the states, which it's trying to do now.
Question?
Hi, I just want to thank you first for what you're doing. You're one of the only people that has the courage to speak the truth, and so thank you. My question is, how are you going to dismantle the CIA, and why are they pulling the UFO card right now? What's your thoughts and opinion on that?
Okay, that's going to be the last question, Mr. Kennedy.
So, my uncle had an extensive plan for reforming the CIA, and that plan was written by two of his most trusted aides. One of them, Dick Goodwin, the other Arthur Schlesinger. And among the 4,000 documents that have illegally been withheld under the Kennedy Assassination Document, John F. Kennedy Assassination Documents Act, where all those documents were supposed to have been released by 2017. Among the 4,000 documents, and President Biden, when he was running, promised to release those documents. President Trump promised and then didn't do it. And who knows who said what to either of those guys? None of us know. They both promised that they were going to do it, and they didn't. But among those 4,000 documents is my uncle's plan for reforming the CIA. So that is one of the documents that they say it's a national security threat if we find out what's in it. But I know what my father was going to do. And because my father told one of his best friends, Pete Hamill, a week before he died, my father said that, Pete Hamill said, what are you going to do about the CIA? And I know it's about the same thing my uncle was going to do, which is to separate the plans division, which is the action division that overthrows all these governments, that murders leaders, that fixes elections and does all the dirty tricks, to separate that from the espionage division. The espionage division we need the people who work in that division. Most of them are extraordinary Americans and patriots. That's the division that does information acquisition and analysis. And we need that, and the president needs that. But because those two are coupled, the espionage division has become an apologist for the Plans Division. And that is the function that has served for 47 years, and that's why there's no accountability for any of these actions by the CIA. So, you know, if the CIA overthrows Mohammed Mossadegh or Saddam Hussein, and it costs $8 trillion, and then there's no accountability for the blowback, for what happened next. Well, what happened next is we left Iraq worse off than we found it. Iraq is now just an incoherent collection of battling Sunni and Shia death squads. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran. We created ISIS. We, with the spillover war in Syria, drove 2 million refugees into Europe and destabilized every democracy, all the liberal democracies in Europe for the next generations. It provoked Brexit. The riots that you see today in France are a direct result of our war, of our invasion of Syria. But nobody ever looks at that blowback. They only look at, mission accomplished. We killed Saddam Hussein. And what you need is a division that's looking over the shoulder and saying, okay, if you kill this terrorist in Syria, okay, that's a great thing with a drone strike, but now he's got 12 brothers and they're all strapping on suicide vests. So did you really do something to make America safer? That question has to be asked and answered, and it never is, because those two divisions are coupled, and we need to decouple them.
I say South Carolina, you say Kennedy. South Carolina! Kennedy! South Carolina! Kennedy! Louder, South Carolina! Kennedy! All right, now we're going to take a class photo. We want people who are on this side, please come over so you can get into it. Jacob up there is going to take the picture from up above. And thank you. Oh, yeah. Too hard on. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to each and every one of you for your patience and waiting in line. Mr. Kennedy does not disappoint. He's staying until every one of you have had the chance to have a selfie with him, so thank you. On the Republican campaign.